Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. After a lengthy back and forth, Chicago Public Schools and the Teachers Union reach a compromise, calling May 1st a day of civic action.
Things that are happening at the federal level are impacting our students. And our students want to see teachers standing up.
Classes will remain in session despite CTU demands, but CPS will provide transportation to an afternoon rally in Union Park and won't retaliate against students and staff who attend.
Tyrants and those who wage wars really do harm to the common good. Those teachings go back many years.
Local religious leaders and beyond slam President Donald Trump's attacks on Pope Leo.
Despite the efforts of corporate lobbyists, as leaders in Chicago, we are not backing down from our commitments to workers in our city.
City Council fails to override Mayor Brandon Johnson's veto of a measure that would roll back the phase-out of tipped minimum wage. Meantime, an appeals court orders the release of 2 members of the so-called ComEd 4 allegedly caught up in former House Speaker Michael Madigan's corruption scheme. Republican candidate for governor Darren Bailey says he's moved into an apartment in Chicago as he tries to woo voters. And the CEO of United Airlines sends many eyebrows sky high as he pitches a long-shot merger with American.
And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are John Pletz of Crane's Chicago Business, Melody Mercado of Block Club Chicago, Mariah Woelfel of WBEZ Chicago, and Hannah Meisel of Capital News Illinois. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right to it. Before we get to some of those topics, Melody, very difficult to watch video release. This is some of the body cam video from the shooting of Officer Crystal Rivera. What did we see?
Well, the video showed that her partner, Officer Carlos Baker, shot her while they were in foot pursuit. They entered an apartment in a neighborhood on the south side. We see both officers go up the stairs, and the person they were chasing enters an apartment. We see Officer Baker kick down the apartment door. We see individuals inside the apartment possibly reaching for a weapon, but they start to scatter. Then we see Officer Baker move to the side away from the door frame. Officer Rivera comes up from behind him and he fires his weapon. CPD says that that was an accident, that was not meant to happen, but while he's shooting his weapon, while he's leaning to the side, he shoots his partner, Officer Rivera. It happens very, very quick. It's very hard to follow the narrative that Officer Rivera's family has been saying that Officer Baker shot her on purpose. We do know that they had some sort of relationship before and that it had ended and things were a little tense between the two. And so, you know, this has been a long time coming with the release of the video, but yeah, we now have seen it and we see it from all angles, from inside the apartment, from Officer Baker, and from Officer Rivera's body cam.
Yeah, obviously still a lot of unanswered questions despite that wealth of video and, as you mentioned, that lawsuit ongoing. All right, Mariah, a long-awaited compromise between CPS and CTU. I guess a compromise wasn't necessarily guaranteed over whether school should be in session on May Day, major demonstrations planned. Sounds like classes in the morning, rally in the afternoon. Does it feel like maybe both sides can walk away happy from this deal?
Yeah, and that's kind of what the reaction is showing. I think CTU wanted the full day for students to go and protest in support of labor rights, and CPS said, you know, we need every day we can get for instruction, and it's quite literally like half and half. You know, I think students will be picked up around 1 p.m. if they choose to go to May Day protests, and so I do think it's a compromise. I think there are still some questions about, you know, who's going to be supervising the kids at the protest, how much staff is needed for that, what about kids if they just leave school instead of going to the protest, how do you kind of, you know, monitor that? So still a lot to work out, but more certainty than there has been in the past few weeks for parents who are wondering, is there going to be school on May 1st or not?
And not that students would ever leave school and not attend the protest.
I've never done that. No.
Yeah, you know, and we'd heard Mayor Johnson essentially say, "Look, this is going to happen." You know, you have to wonder whether there were other folks trying to come in and help broker some sort of an agreement here.
Yeah, I think the CPS CEO did play a big role in brokering that agreement with both with the board president, the school board president, and the CTU.
All right. Well, in news I never thought I quite would be discussing this way, President Trump this week attacked the Pope as weak on crime, also saying he's too far to the left, a criticism some other folks have had. Pope Leo so far essentially has brushed off the attack. Hannah, it feels like a lot of folks are siding with the Pope, including some folks on the right, some of the president's own supporters.
Well, yeah, I mean, as someone put it to me earlier this week, in history for thousands of years of the Christian church, who usually wins in a fight between a political leader and the Pope? It's pretty much always the Pope. And, I think that this does cut across even conservatives who do support the president, especially if they're Catholic, they have this is their bridge too far. This is their third rail, attacking the Pope. We saw Vice President J.D. Vance, who is a new-ish Catholic convert, tell the Pope that he should be careful when he's preaching about the gospel. I think that a lot of people see that as extremely, against what they, imagine what the dynamic should be. The Pope has, said that he does not support any war, and then he was a little bit more specific this week when he said, this war in Iran is baseless. It's not, it's killing innocent people, and it seems like the president, though, does not want to back off. And, we didn't even discuss the memes of the president tweeting AI images about him being Jesus or doctor.
That was also something I didn't quite expect to see. And, we've seen sort of these AI-generated memes that the president has used, over the past year or so, but this one felt like it garnered quite a different reaction than previous ones.
Yeah, definitely a bridge too far for a lot of people.
Well, sticking with sort of some of the fallout from the war on Iran, John, have been many effects on this. Obviously, the human toll. Here at home, some of the political fallout, a lot of it has been from the skyrocketing gas prices. That's not just hitting drivers, it's hitting airlines as well, and you've been covering some of that.
Right. Yeah, for airlines, the second biggest cost for an airline is fuel, and those prices have soared, and jet fuel has gone up even more than gas. So if you think you're feeling it at the pump, the airlines are really feeling it. And the challenge there is that even if the ceasefire holds, the Strait of Hormuz opens up, it doesn't mean that everything's going to go back to normal and that those prices are going to immediately go down. So you've got some analysts thinking that those prices are going to remain elevated substantially throughout the rest of the year, and that it drives up fares. You've already seen baggage fees from airlines go up in an effort to kind of combat that. So the cost of travel is going to go up, and things like the bag fees may not come down.
Yeah, and of course, heading into the busy travel season. Well, sticking with air travel, we heard United CEO Scott Kirby floating the idea of his airline merging with American. Some news this afternoon about what American thinks about the whole thing.
Right. American says no thanks. They're not interested in. They're not having discussions or interested in a merger with United. And one of the things they cite is the question everybody had about this deal is antitrust concerns, competition concerns, and how that plays out for consumers.
Yeah, I mean, how about that? If you're the average air traveler, I think a lot of people are already very frustrated by the fewer and fewer options. So it just seemed like this was something that would be a really tough sell for folks.
Yeah, it's my understanding that one of the effects may be reduced airline options for people. And Chicago is a major hub for both American and United. We're maybe a bit spoiled in that way. We have plenty of options when it comes to travel, and I think that would be an effect for consumers directly.
Yeah, not something they'd be eager to see necessarily. All right, Hannah, the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, they ordered the release of former ComEd CEO Ann Pramaggiore, longtime political operative Michael McLean. They were sort of convicted in this Michael Madigan et al. Investigation. But the Supreme Court now, has this ruling within the last couple of years, kind of changing the quid pro quo question here. So why did they get out? What happens next here?
That's correct. It was quite remarkable on Tuesday this week. Lawyers for Ann Pramaggiore and Mike McLean had argued to the Seventh Circuit to reverse their convictions. To remind viewers, they were convicted in the so-called ComEd 4 case in 2023, separate but very related to Mike Madigan's separate trial. And between the 2023 and now, in 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court basically narrowed the federal bribery statute. And the judge had thrown out the bribery convictions, but they were still last summer sentenced on the remaining convictions. And within not even 4 hours of the finishing of the arguments in front of the Seventh Circuit, the 3-judge panel came out with a pretty short order and said, we order their release. And, they were, I believe, released on Wednesday afternoon. After serving 3.5 months for Mike McLean, 3 months for Ann Pramaggiore, and they will have a new trial. We don't know yet when, but we will soon see the detailed opinion kind of backing up the order for a new trial. I just think it wasn't a guarantee, but I do think that things were kind of going that way. But to see it happen so fast, fascinating.
Yeah, a very speedy ruling on that. Yeah, maybe more than expected.
And lawyers for Mike Madigan separately last week also argued to the Seventh Circuit, but that 3-judge panel, which is different, seemed a little bit more skeptical. Again, it's different judges and slightly different arguments of law, but it'll be interesting to see if the Seventh Circuit takes this opinion into consideration. With Mike Madigan's case, he has been in prison in West Virginia for 6 months now.
Yeah, even if this is something following the law, you have to imagine a lot of Illinoisans not necessarily happy to see this. All right, Hannah, also longtime state lawmaker Barbara Flynn Curry died yesterday at 85. First woman to serve as Illinois House Majority Leader. How do you think she'll be remembered?
Yeah, I mean, not only first woman as House Majority Leader, but I believe, I did the calculations today, I believe she is tied for second longest serving legislator in Illinois history at all, behind Mike Madigan. Wow. She will definitely be remembered as a trailblazer, particularly for women. When she was first elected in 1978, the legislature was only 13% women. And today it's about 44%. And that did not come easily. It did not come without force. And, the people I talked to today to remembered her as, not just a trailblazer for women, but also just a fair negotiator, very, very smart. Everyone said the smartest person in the room. And, also remembered her for her acerbic wit, which I will too.
Yeah, and still active in public life. I mean, right up until the very end.
Yeah, she was, after her retirement in 2019 from the legislature, she moved on to to chair the Illinois Pollution Control Board, and she was still the chair up until yesterday at her death. And she was also very involved in other, more casual political and government processes. Is something that you can't let go after a lifetime in Springfield.
I can imagine, a pretty remarkable figure. All right, Melody, a Springfield story of a different kind. There's a state bill under consideration allowing a pilot for driverless cars like Waymo, but there's a group of unions organizing to push back on this, saying fewer jobs, less safe roads. What did we hear from them?
I also think it's really important to understand that this is very, very early on, but we're seeing the unions trying to build up steam to try to stop this because, of course, their big concern are jobs for their members. And their argument is also this is going to really hurt the middle class. These are individuals that, if you take away their jobs, are not going to be able to order food on DoorDash or go to local restaurants and businesses and spend as much money in the economy because they're their jobs are taken away by, you know, automation. And so, of course, we know that Waymo has been on the streets of Chicago with drivers, mapping out the streets, trying to get ahead of themselves a little bit here. But of course, we are also seeing a very strong show of force from all of the major unions that support transportation, really try to step in here to protect those jobs.
You have to imagine, too, some of this is informed by the way that Uber and Lyft, you know, when they were first getting started, just kind of barreled into a lot of different municipalities and were doing more of a, you know, ask forgiveness rather than permission. So perhaps there are some lessons learned there that they need to get out ahead of this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's, you know, we're seeing a lot of conversations not just about automation, but AI as well. And what have we learned about technology so far is maybe we can try to get ahead of ourselves a little bit here and put in the protective measures now.
It'll be very interesting to see where this goes. And yes, just a pilot program under consideration for the moment. Mariah, some city council news. Another veto win for Mayor Brandon Johnson this week as the phase out of tipped minimum wage will continue. He's had a string of veto wins recently, or of his vetoes surviving.
Yeah. You know, the council has very much been successful in rallying a simple majority to kind of go against some of Brandon Johnson's policies. You know, you'll remember they passed an ordinance making stricter curfew rules in Chicago that he vetoed. They also passed an ordinance that would ban hemp sales throughout the city that he vetoed. And so far we have not been able to see them, you know, kind of garner the momentum to get that 2/3 majority, 34 votes in the city council. We saw that again this week with their effort to freeze wage increases for tipped workers in the city. So as of now, that will stand, and wages will increase in July.
And, you know, does this necessarily point to an improved relationship between the mayor and the city council, or is this more just a question of not quite enough numbers to override these? Yeah,
I think that the 30 aldermen who have, you know, been kind of the same kind of coalition throughout several other things, including the budget process as well, where they passed a budget over the objection of the mayor, that's kind of stayed strong at 30, but I don't think that Johnson has been able to kind of peel any of those people away, including, you know, his own, some of his close allies or former close allies, like, you know, Finance Chair Alderman Paddng.
Yeah.
On the mayoral veto, I mean, when he first used it, was it on the budget? It was the first time in, what, 20-something years? Do you think that this is going to become, you know, now that he's used it a few times, do you think this changes how dynamics are?
I think that he is not scared to use his veto power. And, you know, the first veto, he actually didn't veto the budget, but he didn't sign it to try to just say, I don't endorse this. His first veto was on the curfew ordinance, and that was the first time since Daley. But you've seen, you know, vetoes be used very sparingly throughout Chicago's modern history, especially Mayor Harold Washington, the city's first black mayor, issued tons of vetoes. So, yeah, I mean, I think it does change dynamics a little bit, because I don't think that, I think now that he's not scared to use his veto power, he's ripped that Band-Aid off, you've gotten the headlines that he's going to do this. Maybe he's not necessarily as concerned with peeling some of those alders away, as long as he can keep them at 30 instead of 34.
Interesting, yeah.
I think that just shows that his administration has also gotten better at wheeling and dealing behind closed doors. You know, the curfew ordinance was by Alderman Hopkins. He really sprung that movement, got it passed, it was vetoed. He tried to come again, but the folks in the mayor's office were able to really negotiate very hard on that, and worked with Alderman Hopkins to, quite frankly, put forth something that was extremely watered down from what he originally wanted. So I think we're seeing negotiating just getting a little better within the mayor's office as well.
Yeah, folks starting to get their sea legs underneath them. John, the Cook County State's Attorney this week's been touting its task force aggressively prosecuting crime on the CTA. The RTA is earmarking its first tranche of new state funding also towards safety measures, CTA, Metro, PACE. Does it seem like things are sort of moving in a positive direction? Because transit safety has been such a hot topic in the last several years.
Yeah, it's a major focus of the transit overhaul. It's also been a focus of the Trump administration and their issues. So it's one more example of the attention being paid on that. Because if you talk to riders, that really is at the top of the list.
Yeah, and these sort of widespread negative perceptions in recent years, Melody, how tough is it, thinking of the rider perspective, to change the way people see this issue, even when things are trending in the right way?
I think it's extremely difficult. I'm a blue line user, a red line user, brown line, green and pink.
Wow.
To get around the
Brag
city.
about it.
To get around in my beat of downtown West Loop. I live
Sure.
in Humboldt Park, so I ride a lot of the different L lines, and my experience has been dramatically different on every single one of them. I can tell you, the green line and pink line for me, smokers are the biggest thing. Blue line, I really haven't had many issues on the blue line, mostly positive. The red line, I have experiences of slight harassment on the red line, so I have a negative perception of the red line. All of this is post-pandemic. So I feel like it's very individualistic depending on who you're talking to, and that's just me. I'm just one person, and I know many other people that have similar experiences to me. Again, very dependent on what line that you're riding.
Yeah, absolutely, and what time of day and who else is on there. There's a lot of factors go into it. All right, Hannah, Republican gubernatorial candidate Darren Bailey, he's one of our neighbors now. He's moved into Chicago. What do we know about sort of how long he'll be here, what he hopes to accomplish?
Well, so if you remember back to 2022 when he was the Republican gubernatorial candidate then, he called Chicago a hellhole. He also, he alienated himself from anything having to do with the city. I remember one particular press conference after the Highland Park July 4th shooting, when he referred to a imaginary neighborhood called Edgefield Park. That does not exist, of course.
You kind of get it, though.
It's got a lot of the right combinations.
Sure.
But I do. It seems like he has learned his lesson, in this way, and he wants to ingratiate himself with the city, and kind of because the demographics of the state and voters within the state. He cannot win. He can't even get close to winning anything close to 50% without the city and, of course, the suburbs, which have turned very blue within the last 10 years.
And does this sort of come hand in hand with his efforts also to distance himself from President Trump this election as well? I mean, I think he got like 15% of the vote in Chicago last round, so he's got a lot of ground to make up, and I feel like that's in the same
Right. He called himself this week with I believe an interview with Politico. He said that he's not MAGA, but I think MAGA is maybe in the eye of the beholder, and I think a lot of people would not take him at his word on that.
Yeah. All right, John, a lot of conversation about the rapid proliferation of data centers in Illinois, as well as many other states. You've been doing some reporting on how people feel about regulating those centers. What did you find?
Well, there was a poll done by a group of legislators and some environmental groups that are pushing legislation to basically get the data centers to pay more of their fair share on power. And not surprisingly, it was about 2/3 of the voters who were asked said they'd support that. But it's a reflection of the fact that electricity prices are going up, and you've got consumers who are pointing to data centers, and you saw this with Governor Pritzker earlier in the week. He joined some other governors in the region that includes Illinois, in asking that grid to make sure that data centers are paying more.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a lot of momentum on this from legislators because, as you say, they understand that this is an issue that, even if it's not a one-to-one,
right,
that their voters are very concerned about.
Yeah, it's a real pain point. It's a real pocketbook issue, and consumers have 2 or 3 years ago, most of them wouldn't have known about data centers or ever talked about it, and now they very much are.
Yep. Well, that might be a pain point for consumers. No pain points at this table. You four are great, but we are out of time. So our thanks to John Pletz, Melody Mercado, Mariah Wolfel and Hannah Meisel. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Tonight's presentation of Week in Review is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, BNSF Railway, and Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Sign up for our free email newsletter, Urban Nature, to stay up to date on environmental news, information on local wildlife, and much more. That's at WTTW.com/newsletter. Now, for all of us here at the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. All right, Melody, we landed the big account. Yes. The Candy Hall of Fame is set to open next summer on Michigan Avenue.
Yes.
I mean, this kind of feels like reports of the of Michigan Avenue's demise were a little exaggerated.
Yeah, I would like to say that we at Block Club were very optimistic about the Magewell comeback, and we've seen lots of really great retail come to the space, like the Candy Hall of Fame, which is taking up just 60,000 square feet of vacant retail that's been vacant for years.
Wow.
They're going to have it, of course, it's going to incorporate all of the city's relations to candy, which runs very, very deep in the history of Chicago. And, you know, there are also going to be some ticketed events as well, where you'll get to taste things as well as learn about the different candies that might be your favorite.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm with more than 40 years of experience in medical malpractice.